Hello everyone and welcome to today's presentation. Today we're going to be talking about GDPR and how it's going to affect your business going forward. Now GDPR is something that comes into effect on the 25th of May 2018 and it has a direct effect on every single business within Europe. Also as a business we've got hundreds and hundreds of phone calls relating to GDPR, and rather than trying to answer you all individually, we thought we'd put together a presentation that gives you a complete and total overview of what you need to do to make yourself compliant with GDPR. So with that being said, I'm going to introduce you to Ben. Ben is our head of compliance and is also our head of marketing within our business. So it's Ben who's actually put together today's presentation. Now Ben is going to be actually giving the presentation, but what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be basically being your voice. I'm going to be talking as a business owner and asking him questions in regards to how these regulations are going to affect us as business owners. So with that being said, here's Ben and we're going to get started with the presentation.
Yep, so GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, was agreed upon 2 years ago. It's coming into enforcement May 25th. The media has basically been trying to tell everyone it's the end of the world, it's the end of retail as we know it. But before I get into anything else, I'm going to say that me and Chris are not lawyers, not legal experts. However, we've had a lot of interaction with the regulation itself. So there's been loads of live talks, press releases by the ICO themselves, and copious amounts of reading through those regulations has got us to the point where we are now, where we can share that data and knowledge with yourselves. So straight off, as I said, the GDPR is not a big monster. When it was first drafted, yes, it was scary. We're all going to have to do copious amounts, and even then probably not be able to use any of our customers.
Yeah, from my mind, up until about 8 weeks ago, the issues that it was going to cause our business, both my retail businesses and my marketing and obviously Premier EPOS, it was going to be a massive, massive problem. And then luckily, as I say, within the last 8 weeks, the legislation has been relaxed, it's been weakened down, which actually has then made it considerably easier for businesses like us. So,
yeah. So what is GDPR? It's not a one-size-fits-all regulation. It's going to be different for every single business out there just because of the amount of different articles and regulations it's made up of. So for one business and another, they'll have completely different sets of regulations that they have to adhere to. So you're not going to be fined £17 million for every slight infraction that you do to it. The fines will get more severe depending on how severe your infraction or failure to adhere to the regulations themselves are.
Yeah, I think that's a big point that Ben's should make there, and I think he has well. The media is portraying at the moment that essentially if you have an infringement, you could get fined up to £17 million, and I think that's plus VAT, isn't it? So isn't it
or 4% of your gross income, whichever is highest.
Yeah, so you know the fines are massive. I think the way it's being portrayed possibly is a little bit like the Millennium Bug was portrayed. If you go back to the start of the century, where it was going to decimate everything. I think the realistic results are going to be a lot less dramatic than that. I think, as Ben's rightly said there, we were really worried about the levels of fines and what it could mean for our business. I think Ben's going to come on to later on, but I think we'll find that that's not really going to be the case. The £17 million fines probably aren't for small businesses like us.
No, and the ICO themselves have said direct that they're after the big mega corporations dealing with data in the millions or tens of millions. They're not trying to ruin life and business for small business owners. So in a lot of cases, you might not even see a fine, as long as you've got all the proper groundwork in place and you've done everything that you can to adhere to the regulations, you've done everything the ICO wants in their books. If you ever get pulled up for investigation, you may get a warning at that, so long as you adhere to it all. And as I said, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, are the governing body to make sure you are all adhering to the regulations. So the GDPR itself applies to personal data, and that is, as defined in the regulation, any data that can be used to identify a living individual, a living human being. Anything apart from that is not covered by the regulation. But that can be for your customers, that's also for your staff members as well. doesn't matter what form of data you have on them, if it can be used to identify them, it's covered. So some of the main forms of personal data, whether it be their name, their address, mobile or phone number, email address, their social media profile, because you've all seen from Facebook just how much data they've kept on everyone, the birthday or date of birth, and today in the modern world, their IP address or any cookies that you might have stored on their computers, machines, to track them around the internet.
So does that mean that the ICO are classing IP addresses as if it's an individual? So even if you've not got someone's name or you've not got their address or anything, their IP address is the same as their name. It's being counted as the same type of data, is that correct?
Yeah, because that IP address can be used to access a secure machine that will probably have that person's data on it, whether it be a mobile phone, that's going to have their number, of course, it will probably have their contact details saved, so on and so forth. Same for computers, servers, anything like that that can be identified by an IP address. That is personal data. So they have a checklist of 8 questions that you can go through that we're going to provide for you to classify whether something is personal data. I'm just going to breeze through it now. You're also obviously going to have access to this full presentation through our online GDPR portal. So question 1, question 2.
Essentially what we want you to do within these questions is read through them, but I think the way that we best describe it is, if at any point the data is related to any part of an individual, in other words, if you can identify anyone in any way, be it through their name, address, phone number or email address, etc., or even their IP address, then it's classed as personal data. So,
or a photograph as well. Nowadays you can go on Google, drag a photograph and do a search by looking at that and find out anything else that's relating to it.
So yeah, so GDPR basically has come into place to essentially identify who are individuals and make sure that companies like us that are holding data on people, if we're holding it on an individual or we can identify them in any way, it's classed as personal data. So what you want to do is you want to go through these list of 8 questions that Ben set up for you, and make sure that any data you hold, whether it's about an individual or not, if it is, it's covered by the GDPR regulations.
Yep, so by the end of it you should have some inkling. If you think by any possible slim chance that it is personal data, best practice, I would say treat it as such, treat it safely, securely, and just be prepared for the eventuality that you might lose it. Only in the case that you're 100% certain that something is not personal data would I say that you're free to use it however you want. So yeah, best practice would say, if you're unsure, treat it as personal data. If you really want to, you can get the legal advice on it, but just save yourself the time and effort and just treat it safely. So under the regulations, one of the main points is that data now belongs to the individual, not the business that holds the data. In the past, mega corporations would likely have given warnings or fired people for losing data on their customers. Nowadays, it doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to the person themselves in all cases.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. That from my point of view was that is a big change in regards to the way that we all deal with data. You know, my loyalty card customers, I've always kind of associated them as being my property. You know, I've worked very hard to get a list of customers that we can sell to. And essentially, although we're still going to be able to sell to them, and we're going to show you ways that we can do that later on, the fact that the data now is not actually mine, it's we're essentially looking after it for the individuals now. That's essentially the big change. Just, in other words, it's just a bit of a mind shift, in other words, that we're not now owning the data. At any point, we're only looking after it for the individuals whose data we've collected.
Yep. So because it now belongs to the individual, it's given birth to the subject access request, which in layman's terms is, if I was to come into your store and say, I want to know all the data that you have on me, it's my right and you have to give it to me, and you've got 1 month to comply with that. So it's my data, I want it back. You don't have to delete it in this case, but you do have to give it to the person. So you've got 1 calendar month from the day after the request to complete it and have given it to that person. So if I was to come into your store and say I want it all now, you do not have to comply with that. You've got 1 month from them, and it has to be submitted verbally or within writing.
Yeah, I think again, from my mind, that I've never, in 13 years of being in business, I've never actually been asked so far what data do I hold on people. That might be a change. If I'm being really honest, I don't think that's going to change at all. I don't think that we're going to get suddenly inundated with hundreds of requests for how much data we hold on people. However, the legislation now states that if we do get asked, we have to be able to provide that information that we hold on people within 30 days. That's all it is.
Although, as always, I'd make sure that you're checking their identification so that you are not giving someone's data to another individual. If you did, that would be a data breach and you would be violating the regulation.
Same regulation that you're trying to comply with, ironically.
Yep. So, guidelines laid down that you have to be able to do the following in the event that someone asks you for their data. So you should be able to describe what data you've got on them. So we hold your name, your date of birth, your postal address. We have your IP address on record because we give you IT support, so on and so forth. Are you currently processing their data? Yes, we are processing your email address. We are using it to send you informative or marketing emails. They should be told if it's being sent anywhere else. So do you use a service such as MailChimp to handle all emails within your business? So yes, we use MailChimp as they are compliant and they all automatically include an unsubscribe option on the emails. So it's helpful for us to use them to send emails to you. And finally, by the end of the month, you need to have given them a copy of all of your data for them. With the primary EPOS system, we're currently writing a report, so you'll be able to generate it and hand them all the data that you are holding on them.
Yeah, so within our system, hopefully very, very soon, you'll just be able to click one simple report, and that'll then produce a report that you can hand over to the customer. You're completely compliant now, so you shouldn't need to wait the 30 days, obviously, that you've got within the GDPR regulations.
Yep, but also that is just for the EPOS system. You'll have to give them anything that you have online. If you have anything in filing cabinets, that is up to you. You've got 1 month to try and find it all, do a big trail chase, and then hand it over to them, either by post, in-store, in person, by email. That part is up to you. So it doesn't matter if you're a multinational corporation with tens of millions of customers, or if you just started your own business and you're the only employee, the regulation applies just as much to you as it does to anyone else. So if you're the business owner, then you have to decide why you're collecting the data. If it's just staff, they're reliant on you to tell them why, but they are just as liable for any infractions that any infractions they're part of. So you need to be training your staff on all of this just as much as you need to be taking it all in.
Yeah, so to be fair, I think what Ben's actually saying there is anyone who's taking data of in any way of customers
Or handling it
in any way, that's very true, sorry, or handling it. We basically need, as business owners, we just need to have a conversation with them and explain the process so that there is no ambiguity. They basically know exactly what they are meant to do with that data and what they're not allowed to do with that data. You need to set up that as a policy. It's not a big thing. We probably all do it already. I know, for instance, in my retail stores, I focus very much on how we collect the data off the customers, the questions we ask, and what we do with that data anyway. So for me, it's no change at all.
Yep, so we're going to be covering all the processes later on in the presentation anyway that you have to go through in the event of someone coming in, breaches, all of that. So I've already mentioned yourselves and your staff. You as a business owner are most likely what's called a controller. So you are the one deciding why you're using the data, how you're going to use it, as your team leads would be as well. Processes is anyone at all that would have access to that data and would be physically using it. So it might be yourselves again in the case, but it could be your general floor staff. They're taking data when they're signing customers up. If you have a marketing team or social media team, anyone like that who is using the data within the regulations from here forward would be labelled as a processor. So this is just for later on when you want to read through any regulations. If you ever have any qualms about it, you know what these two fields represent. So up until 2 months ago, about 8 weeks ago, you would have heard from everyone that consent was your only way that you were going to be able to keep on using customer data.
That hadn't been updated yet.
Yeah, hadn't been updated. So now they've become, as Chris said, a bit more lax on some areas, and you've now got 6 ways to lawfully process that data. So you've got data for a contract, you've got legal obligation data, you've got public task data, you've got vital interest data, you've got consent data, and finally you've got our new, basically, saviour, legitimate interest data.
Yeah, so I think what would be interesting to get Ben's take on it a little bit, but I know my impression, particularly from focusing on the media and what's being put out there, and this, you know, the GDPR is going to kill business and we're not going to be able to send an email to our customers anymore. Am I right in saying, Ben, that was because the initial drafts of the legislation were focusing particularly on us all having to get consent? Is that right?
Yeah, so there were a lot more tied down and nailed, that there was exact processes for everything that had to be covered, and that it was literally the same for every business, and that if you hadn't already been following these in the past, that you may necessarily not have been able to use your data. So if you hadn't been compliant up until now, you wouldn't be able to use the data that you'd collected in that way.
So what you're saying is that essentially up until the latest draft change of the GDPR, any data that we have previously, so all the customers I've got, say, on my loyalty scheme, or all the people on my mailing lists, just like yourselves, wouldn't have been able to be communicated to by us, correct?
Correct.
However, that's now changed by the looks of it, yeah?
And finally, apart from those, there are 2 more classes of data. So you've got special category data and criminal offence data, which we'll cover in a little bit. Criminal offence isn't really likely to apply to any of you. Special category might apply to some of you. So we'll start with data for a contract. So we have the GDPR definition for it. So the processing of the data is necessary for a contract you have with the individual, or because they have asked you to take specified steps before entering into a contract.
So what would be some examples of a contract that we could that would be covered by this, would you say?
So if you have every 6 months, if you're only 3 months into their current subscription period, you can hold on to their data until the end of that period. Absolutely fine. That is your basis for holding on to that data. Same for any invoices that you have for HMRC regulations. You have to keep hold of them for 7 years. You just have no way around that. Same for your employee data. You have to hold employee data for 7 years from the termination of their employment. So if you lost an employee 3 years ago and they've came back and said, I want you to delete all my data, legally you're not allowed to, and you simply just say, no, here's my reason why I need to hold it.
Which is your data for contract in this particular scenario, correct?
Yeah. And then also any warranties that you have. If you currently have a product that you sold to that customer that's under warranty, you should be holding on to that data in case they ever need to basically cash in on that warranty. So we then move on to legal obligation data, which is the processing data is necessary for you to comply with the law, which is not including contractual obligations. For most of you, this wouldn't really be something you would come across a lot unless you have many dealings with law enforcement. You've got public task data. So if you're ever involved with a crime and you have to hand over your details, the service have a right to keep a hold of that. More broadly, it could also be for if you were involved in a car crash or an accident, and details had to be handed over then. Again,
that's probably not the type, as in. So what they've done is that I think Ben should, and we'll probably say it later on actually, but basically the GDPR is replacing the old Data Protection Act, correct? And that Data Protection Act basically was just this.
It's very outdated.
Yeah, outdated set of legislation. So when the ICO and the governing bodies have come up with GDPR, what they've done is they've tried to cover anything that could hold personal data in any way. So be that, so if you are involved in a car crash and you're nothing to do with the business, technically you are still covered by GDPR for taking someone's information, correct?
Yeah.
We're all looking at this from a business point of view, but actually everyone is covered by the GDPR, correct?
Yeah, it's all handling and holding of personal data. It's not in just like a social interaction, so you can still talk and email all your friends and family absolutely fine. You don't have to worry about that. Same for business contacts as well. If you've got friends or reps, for example, in other businesses, you can still be contacting them with emails without having to have them subscribed and everything on them. They were just some of the examples. Once again, the full definitions are there for you to look at in the slides. We're just trying to cover them briefly so we're not here for hours and hours and hours. We then move on to vital interest data, which essentially is any data that's required for the protection of someone's life.
Which again probably doesn't account for most of you guys, but
yeah. Again, definitions are there if you want to read through them, and I would recommend that you do read through them for your own safety and justification in the future. I don't know all of your businesses, I don't know all of your lives, how you're interacting, so it may be applicable to yourself. Then we move on to consent data, which has been the backbone of it up until now. So it's when the individual has given clear consent for you to process their personal data for a specific purpose. So you have to outline to the individual exactly how you're going to use their data in every eventuality.
I think my point is looking at it from a business point of view. So what Ben's saying, every part of this you need to focus on. So that my concern very much was, and Ben, who heads up my marketing team, he's heard me moan about this for the last good couple of months. Yeah, but the last couple of months I've been really focusing on it. This is the part that every one of our customers pretty much is thinking is having to happen, which is that just about everyone believes that you have to now have consent, which essentially will mean, so that the amount of times that we've been asked for the ability to put a couple of check boxes within our
within the EPOS on the customer screen.
Yeah, so that when we sign a customer up, we check these boxes to say that we're allowed to now send them an email, or we're now allowed to send them a text. Though firstly, we're probably in agreement that that wouldn't work anyway, because it actually would have to be the customer themselves who check the boxes for it to be covered by consent. But also, most people would never check those boxes, so we'd never ever be able to contact them.
Yep.
So how is this going to affect us, do you think now, Ben? If we went down that route, would it be a big issue?
Well, yeah, if you were to put checkboxes everywhere and that was your only way of getting consent, you'd still get customers coming in and maybe signing up, but they'd say, no, I don't want to be receiving marketing or information from you, because most people would treat that as just spam. And even when it's not, they're not likely to just openly and freely give you access to contact them whenever you like.
Yeah, I think me as an internet marketer, I can, as is Ben, I think we can both testify that whenever we put a checkbox on a page, say like a landing page or a sales page, that is not forced to be ticked, it doesn't get ticked. Would you agree on that? Yep. As well?
And you are no longer allowed to force it to be automatically ticked. They have to positively and clearly manually select it themselves.
Including terms and conditions, though, that wouldn't be the case, would it? So you still force them to have read it.
Yeah.
So you can still do that, as in, so they have to read the terms and conditions to be able to buy your product. You can do that.
Yeah.
But you just can't force someone
to consent to give you their data for
exactly.
usage. And as I said, it needs to be specific and it needs to be explicit. You cannot do a blanket consent request for tick this box to give me freedom to contact you and use your data however I like. That does not work. What it also means is, even if you perfectly outline every way you're going to use the data now, if a new service was to come out in 3, 5, 10 years, a new social media site, a new form of marketing, an entirely new form of media or contact that we've not even thought of yet, you would no longer have consent to contact them using that media. You would have to stay with your old methods and you would not be able to advance along with technology.
So I'm guessing you're going to advise us not to use the consent then?
No, there are some specific cases where unfortunately you are forced to use it, but as we're going to say at the end, the regulation is most likely going to evolve and advance and change from the point on from its enforcement anyway. So we may see some leeway in that area. So if you have given people the option for consent for you to use their data, you have to give them just a simple and straightforward way of removing their consent. So if it's in emails, you have to be able to unsubscribe. In texts, you have to have an opt-out option, so the text will say, text stop to this number to stop receiving messages. Same for direct mail, or if they're in store, online, wherever they are, they need to be able to say, no, I don't want you to be able to contact me anymore. I don't want you to still have my consent. So it then goes through email, SMS, and a few other ways that you can make sure that you're giving them ways to remove their consent. And yeah, you need to keep every bit of consent data secure. So you need to basically be able to justify at any point that you have had that consent from a customer. So what time, what date, how did they give you the consent for it, all needs to be kept on record. It needs to be secure. So I'd have it both printed off and digitally.
If someone gives, if one of our business owners that's watching
Yep.
Has already gone down the route of consent for their customers,
Yep.
and obtained it, are they able to then change that to one of the other methods, or not really?
At the moment there's a grey area because obviously the Data Act isn't in enforcement yet, the GDPR hasn't came about. So there's a 50-50 split on what you can do. Some people will say that if they have actively replied and a customer has given you their consent, you have essentially signed into a binding contract with them. It's not up to you to remove that consent, it's up to them. So if you want to get rid of it, you then have to contact them and say, please remove your consent, and we will then use your data for legitimate interest, which we'll get onto in a minute.
But
The other one is saying that it's not started yet, the GDPR is still a few days away, it's on the 25th of May. You have the option to go back and change it and use the data however you wish. However, I would make full documentation of the fact that you have obtained consent, realised with the new update there is another way that you can be doing it, justify your reasons for the change and say, no, I've gone away from consent to using this, and you should be covered. But once again, if you have already gotten consent, you may be better off getting some legal advice for whether you can use that data however you wish. As I said, you've got to show it's been freely given, you've got to document the entire process you've gone through to get that consent. But as we said, I would avoid trying to use consent if possible, because although it is the most secure way of holding on to the data, because they've explicitly said, yeah, you're free to do this, 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 this and this with it, it limits your freedom and right to that data.
Right.
And I mean, you may be getting still emails from everyone saying, listen, we need your consent or we cannot contact you. That is just how it is.
I guarantee you are. I know I am. I'm getting definitely getting tens of emails every day saying, "Can you please give me consent?" Essentially to carry on emailing you. Which, by the way, we completely advise you not to do.
Yeah. Except for these are the three cases that people are probably doing this in. So, first group is going to be early adopters, so people who are working from that first draft of the regulations where consent was such a big part of it.
So what you're actually saying is that the people who actually were organised and did it properly
might actually be worse off.
Might be worse off in this case. So that's interesting.
If they have had a really good success rate with it, then fantastic for you. Fantastic. If you have done that, great. If you've managed to get thousands of people to give you full consent for their data, then you can use it exactly as you've laid out. But as I said, if any new methods come about, it's up to you to try and get that consent again.
Sorry to interrupt, Ben, but I think something that we've had a couple of events recently where we've been speaking to clients. We had one customer earlier this week who'd sent an email to about 3,000 customers, was it?
Yeah, about 3,500 customers from his current list. He'd deleted them all, but first he sent one email back saying, please give me consent to continue contacting you in the future. 2 weeks later, he was on a grand total of 65 customers, so he'd lost the entirety of his list. Luckily, for the ones that haven't replied, he's going down the route of legitimate interest, which we'll be covering now, because the consent is only in play if the customer has directly replied by either saying yes or no. So he did have some unsubscribes as well, so basically he's got 100 customers from that list that he has lost from being able to process however he wants. He's stuck with consent.
Yeah.
That's only because he's choosing to keep that until the regulation. He's not going through the grey blurred route. The second group is large companies, multinationals, dealing with personal data in the millions, tens of millions. Because even though there are the other methods for justifying why you're processing the data, to do it on such a large scale requires just far too much manpower to be able to justify every account. So instead they can just have one massive document that's got all of their customers, every form of consent they could have, when that consent was given and the proof for it, so that in the event of an ICO investigation they can literally just hand them over a stupidly big document and say, feel free to go, that is all the consent that I have received and I have adhered to it. Finally is group 3, and this is the one where unfortunately if you comply with that you have to use consent, and that is if you process special category data, which we'll be going over in a little bit.
Just briefly though, what does special category data include? Things like...
So, child data, so anyone who's under the age of consent, they would be classed as special category data if you held their personal data.
You'd have to actually go down the consent route, correct? Yeah.
Yep, same for genetic data and a few others that will go on a list. And one point for any of you who do have child data, if that person then becomes older than the age of consent, once they reach 18, the regulation states that they still gave you their data whilst they were under the age of consent.
So you'd have to actually, if you were going down that route, you'd have to still keep them in consent.
You'd have to treat it still as special category data unless you were to get it from them again.
Once they were 18.
Yeah, as a legal adult. So, finally, as I said before, our saviour, legitimate interest data. So the definition is as follows, and as you can see, it's a bit longer than the rest. The processing of the data is necessary for your legitimate interests or the legitimate interests of a third party, unless there is a good reason to protect the individual's personal data which overrides those legitimate interests. And it can't apply if you're a public authority processing the data, performing official tasks. But essentially with legitimate interest, it applies just as much to you as a business owner as it does to a customer or individual. So with this one, the processing of the personal data for direct marketing purposes may be recognised as carried out for a legitimate interest.
So that for us, that's the saviour. Yeah, that one line there within the legislation means that us as businesses can have a legitimate interest, the same legitimate interest that the individual has got. It's in our legitimate interest to keep that data. So that for us is a massive change to the legislation. It basically means that we have as much right to the info actually as the individual are on it.
It gives you the most freedom with how you process that data, so long as you can give justification for it. And we'll be covering justification a bit more later on. So it can be claimed if all the following are true. So it's in the interest of the business or the customer to be able to communicate. So once again, it's fantastic they're actually taking into consideration your feelings, your needs as a business owner or a manager, depending who's watching this. So it can't be detrimental to the customer, it can't be spam of any form or something that be considered as being a nuisance. So if you're sending an email with a virus in it, you're being a nuisance. If you're sending spam, spam.
But not knowing the people who would be watching this video, that's not what you're sending. So any legitimate communication where you're sending an email to try and sell something, that's fine.
And it's also your definition of what spam is. So even if you're sending the marketing or sales emails every day, if you have a good reason for doing that, that is absolutely fine. Think of Amazon, they send 1 to 3 emails to their customers on average every single day. Have you seen them stopping doing it? And you've got to be able to justify why you're using it, and it's going to have minimal privacy impact. So you still can't be breaking any of the other rules, but you can use it in any way that you construe and justify as being legitimate, in your legitimate interest as a business owner. So yeah, you can rely on legitimate interest for marketing activities if you can show that the way you have used people's data is proportionate and reasonable, and that is in your terms. You have to decide that. It's not laid in stone. There's no official stats or amounts or time frames for it. It is up to you. As long as you can justify it in your plan, you are secure.
So in other words, right, our recommendation, let's put it this way, most of what our business is going to be doing is using legitimate interest. We want you to use this method for contacting your customers, this reason for actually complying with GDPR. If we do that, essentially all of us will be able to carry on using our customers pretty much in the same way we are now, except for in the rare cases when you've actually got to get consent because of like special category data, etc.
So this is why you're not going to get any emails from us saying that we need your consent, because we don't. We're relying on legitimate interest. You've either shown interest in one of our systems or you've purchased one of our systems, so it's fully within our reasoning that you're going to be interested in it in the future, so we have a right to process your data.
Just one little thing I'd like to put in there again. One of our customers this week used to own a retail store and now has an attraction, which are in completely different fields. Our interpretation, as is his, is that the 3,000 customers he had from his retail store, he has no legitimate interest to keep contacting them
For his attraction.
So actually he would lose those customers, or he'd have to try and obtain consent.
Yep.
Or if he opened, say, an online version of his retail store, he could then use the legitimate interest to be able to use them again.
Yeah, exactly. As long as he's kept that data securely stored throughout, even if he had plans to reopen the store, then that could be construed as legitimate interest to keep a hold of that data. If you cannot give any justification for why you're keeping a hold of it or using it, you have to get rid of it. And as I said, a lot of this isn't set in stone, so it is up to you to decide which basis you want for your businesses. Are you going to go through contractual consent, but legitimate interest is our recommendation for every one of you if you can use it. So yeah, there's no set steadfast ones that have to apply to a certain business unless you operate special category data or you're one of the services or lawful bodies. So yeah, choose legitimate interest, but make sure that you're keeping a full record of all your bodies of data, which we'll be covering in a little bit. So finally we move on to special category data. So there are, as I said, certain pieces of personal information, personal data that are construed as special category under the regulations. So it's personal data revealing racial or ethnic origin, political opinions, religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union memberships, genetic or biometric data, data concerning health, sex life or sexual orientation, and as I said, child data. So to process any of that, you have to have consent.
So any of you who do those things, just make sure you're getting consent. Everyone else who's holding different styles of data, let's go down the route of using legitimate interest.
Yep. So there is also low risk data, so business data. So if you were to have the email info@primaryepos.co.uk, that is not personal data. You cannot identify an individual from it. However, if you were to have ben@primaryepos.co.uk and you have any of my details, that would be classed as personal data. It's not on the public domain, it's not easily accessible. I've given you that data if you have hold of it, and that can be used to identify me, so it has to be treated securely just as everything else would. But there is others, as I said, that are low risk, that in the event of any data breaches, if you were to lose some business contacts information, they are treated with slightly lighter regulations than other individuals' personal, private contact details and data. But for best practice, I would still treat it with just as much security and importance as you can possibly do.
So what you want to do, I think where we've got up to so far within the presentation is we've kind of spelled out for you what type of data there is and how you want to look at essentially classifying your data. Once you've made those decisions, we now want to look at something a little bit different, like where, how we actually start implementing the GDPR within our business.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So where do you start? So there's a few different processes that you have to go through. Obviously you've got to make everything secure, which we'll be covering in a little bit. But you should be starting off with what's called the data map, which is basically your paper trail. For the eventuality that the ICO comes a knocking, you have it ready to give them and say, listen, this is the entirety of the interaction with personal data within my business. You can go through the process from start to finish and check that I'm doing it exactly as I say I am. And also in the process of making a data map, it will give you yourselves a better insight as to how your business works. So you're making the paper trail, and it's as I said, only for personal data. They're not bothered about random transactional data or stock data, just anything relating to individuals. So the way I do it is basically drawing a giant flowchart is the easiest way to say it.
We're going to show you that later on, I think, aren't we?
Yep.
We're going to show you our example from our business.
So you're going to write out every form of interaction, every piece of software, every team that has access to it, what the data is, why you're using it. Once you've got it all drawn out as a big map, you're then going to write a short description for every point along that interaction with your business, saying what it is and your justification for why you've chosen that. So, as I said, you need to start at the point where you first get access to that data. So how does any data come to your business? Do you get it from your sales team, in-store from people signing up, from adverts online, business cards?
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I know when I first seen the presentation, the part that I struggled a little bit with was this part was like, why are we doing it? What's the point of the data map? I think the way that you described it to me was kind of perfect. Essentially what you're trying to do is, you're trying to produce a document that if GDPR ever turn up, you can literally hand it to them and they can see very, very clearly, very, very quickly, just literally where your data goes. So and essentially that you're looking after your data and that you've thought about it. So if you can open a document and it says that someone who buys a product from me at my till and I sign them up for a loyalty card, I just want to show the flow of what happens with that data so that someone takes it at the till, we fill in their information, we store it securely, and then what happens to it from there. So that's what Ben's explaining to you now. It's how you actually design that data map for your business. It's actually, although it's a lot of words and a lot of thinking, actually it's a really simple document to produce and actually won't take you virtually any time at all compared to what we expect. So
yeah, it is going to be a little long-winded, but once you get started you will see that the processes are simple in themselves. There's just quite a lot to it. And as I said before, it's just as important for employee data as it is for customer data. You can do these as two completely separate documents if you want, and the employee one will be a lot smaller because you've got a lot less places that you're going to get the data in and you do a lot less with it once you hold it. So then you need to go over what's processed the data. So you may have gotten someone's name, email address and phone number. What process has gone through? Has that been an online landing page which is then automatically sent it to your secure customer server? Has it been inputted manually by a member of staff that then has to go through an EPOS system onto your local network or a hard drive, so on and so forth? And once again, it has got some more descriptions in there and examples. So then you've got to make sure you then cover any third-party involvement in detail. So does it go to any external sources? So if you offer finance within your business and you're sending financial data across to them, they're a third party, they have to be labelled. Your PDQ card machine providers, any data that goes across to them, they're a third party. If you use services like MailChimp, PayPal, Stripe, anything like that.
Yeah, Facebook, any of them.
They're all third parties and you have to list them just as much as you have to list all your own internal programs, processes, teams, and if you want to go into full detail, eventually you would then put on names of team leads as well, or even individual staff. But for now we're just trying to get the bare bones, the basis of your data map covered and finished. So now you can move on to where the data is going to be secured itself. So if it's paper or physical data, it's got to be within a locked room, or if not in a locked room, it's got to definitely be within a locked container or filing cabinet. So you can't let everyone have access to all the data, same for a computer as well. If there's anything on a computer that can access personal data that you're storing, it's got to be fully passworded, and ideally there's going to be different account levels on it as well. Just like there is in the EPOS system, you've got your administrators, your supervisors, your general retail staff. Your general retail staff may be able to input data in, but they're certainly not going to be able to manage it and alter it later on. Yeah. That's what we'd recommend you set up.
I think from my mind, my business, it's meant that because I do hold some paper information, I've had to actually physically put a lock on my office, which wasn't there before, and I've also had to have like a locked filing cabinet. Ours is more like a safe actually. As well as that, our network within our business has had to be more secure, meaning that rather than people being able to swap computers quite so easily, they can still do that, but we have to do it with a username and password now.
Yep, and this is also the point where if you use the primary EPOS system, we're going to be coming into play within your data maps. Obviously, if you're using our terminals, you have to know about them. So we're going to be sending you over a load of information about our service, saying that they are fully secure, they're all located within Europe, which is a big part of the regulation you want to see, that there's no external connections going elsewhere with it all, basically the process that happens between till and server, so on and so forth. So yes, security measures, so if you do have any computers, back offices, terminals like that, you cannot have them open to anyone. They have to be password protected now. And I'd recommend that you do the same for any programs that you use on them as well. So whether you use MailChimp, Google, Facebook, anything like that needs a secure password that you do not have written on a piece of paper next to the computer, or anywhere that's easy to find and access. Quite a few of our customers are guilty of that. So what precautions are you taking, what measures have been made to basically try and prevent any data breach or failure to adhere to the regulations themselves? So yeah, you've put passwords on anything, that's fantastic. Everything is locked and secure, that's what they want, and only certain levels of staff have access to different pieces of data. And that any external connections are fully secure, locked down so that no one else can try and access it. So finally, you then need to go on to the internal connections in your company, which teams have access to data at different stages, which levels of staff. So getting it to you is one part of the puzzle. What you do with it henceforth is an entirely different one. So your marketing team may be going on to MailChimp, Facebook, Google, using that data to make audiences that they're going to send emails or advertisements or information to. You need to be documenting all of this down in your map. So once it's been transferred and you're starting to use it, you want to justify why you're using it. So why are you sending your customers information about your products? Simple answer is, they have your product, surely they are interested in it, and you've got legitimate interest to fulfill that interest on their part, for lack of a better terminology.
As well as ours. As well as our own legitimate interest for contacting them to make some sales.
Yeah, so same as delivery details may have to go to DPD,
Yeah.
Royal Mail, any other delivery company, because they're the ones that handle all your deliveries to your customers. Or are you just going to simply keep the person informed about your business rather than news about yourselves in case it affects them? There's loads of different ways that you're going to be using their data in the future. It's up to you to try and think of as many of them and outline them in your data map. So now that you've specified all your future uses for the data, you need to decide how long you're going to keep it. So if it's cookies or tracking code with Google and Facebook, they have their own limitations, 6 to 18 months depending on the service. You'd have to look into them for that. If it's employee data, as I said, it's a minimum of 7 years from the end of their contract. For HMRC reasons, same as invoice data. A few other bits and pieces have defined timeframes that you have to adhere to. If it's your own reasons for keeping the data, do you operate anything within your business where 12 months after a warranty ending on a product you stop keeping the data, or do you keep all your data indefinitely until a person or individual decides to unsubscribe or manually say, no, I don't want you to use it anymore? As I said, 7 years or customer data. If you want to give them a time frame, lay it out in your terms and conditions, privacy policy. If it's indefinite, let them know that as well. And same, social media platforms, the actual data stored in them will most likely have its own lengths. So after that, finally, we do come to the final point, which is the end of your time with the data. So how do you finish your interaction with it? Do you delete it manually, automatically when the time frame's ended? Does it happen when they unsubscribe? Or do you not have an end of time of working with the data? Do you keep it indefinitely? So you just have to be able to verify why you are keeping the data for as long as you are, and what happens at the point that the point of the end, basically. Why has it happened? What's the justification for it? Yep, we've stopped our contact with this customer because using MailChimp they've unsubscribed, so they've came off our mailing list for a certain group. So if you can cover all those elements in the data map, that is fantastic. And as I said, that's both drawn and written descriptions and justifications for each area. You're 90% of the way there with a lot of the annoying backbone of GDPR, because you should already be secure anyway, so hopefully you won't have to bother with any more of that. But as long as you make sure all of your interaction points, all of your storage areas are fully secure, and that your staff are as well. It's just as much of a breach or infraction if one of your staff were to copy and steal all your data, send it off to someone else or even for themselves and use it off-site, because that is completely against regulations that your customers don't want that to happen, essentially. So once you've got the basic one done, you can go back to it if you want and divulge and go into more detail on it at a later date and put a paragraph or two to each point. That is up to you. You've covered the basics and you should be good. So very briefly, here is one of the ones that we did upstairs, and that's just a part of one of our customer interaction maps. Our employee one, once again, is separate, and they all do go into a lot more detail. We have a lot more contact points, but just so you can see, it is literally a flow chart. We've got, from landing pages, you've got an automatic sending and conversion of your customer data that they input into our database. From there we've got legitimate interest to contact them, so we have SMS marketing, email, phone calls, direct mail pieces that all use the various data fields. It's either handled by the marketing team, the sales team, or the support team for doing support calls to people. For as long as they own our system, our support has full right to be able to contact them if they're paying for our support contracts. And with our marketing, with SMS, email, so forth, if they unsubscribe from our list, that is the end of their interaction with us. Otherwise, we're going to keep them for as long as we feel they have interest with our products.
Yeah, I think from my mind, what Ben had just done then, which was that map, that actually made life a whole lot easier for me to visualise, because all that we did is we literally drew what happened. So we drew the flow of what happens with customers' data. So from the sign up to becoming our customer to eventually maybe leaving the list. Ben had covered that in a little flow diagram, and that flow diagram, from my mind, one, made it easier for me to visualise what was going on, but actually the whole point is that would cover you if you ever had an ICO investigation. You want the flow diagram like that, and then you want the actual written data map that Ben's going to talk about now.
Yeah, so that was just for one of our internal sets of customers. For any interaction with other companies, you're doing your own ones, so that was a short 10-stage point, and that was just the drawing side. That wasn't any of the descriptions for it as well. The actual point for us, I think, is something like 30 to 40 points of interaction long, and for copious different sets of data, employees, customers in here, external connections, so on and so forth. But basically, just keep going through it again and again and again, keep adding to it until you physically can't think of any other way that you have interacting with customer data within your business. And of course, if you ever do put in any new forms of processing data, add that to your map, update all of your records for it as well. So once again, this is a quick example. So you've gained personal contact details on a landing page. It's then automatically managed and sent to your customer database. Your reason for processing it is you have legitimate interest. You're going to process their email address through the third party that is MailChimp to send their marketing, informative or sales emails. That process is going to be managed by the marketing team. If you want, you can label different people who are responsible for different lists. It's going to be indefinite time frame. We've got no reason that we can see to delete that data because they've shown interest at us in some point. Most likely they're going to have interest again going on to the future. The end of life would only come if they were to unsubscribe from that list, and the termination process is automatically handled by MailChimp. That's a very, very simple explanation of one line, one branch of it. As I said, it goes for just as the regulations cover physical data just as much as they do electronic data. So you've got to be just as secure with all the practices that I've said. So if you've got any big filing cabinets chock full of old data, reams of A4 or files, you've got two options really. You either go through and sort it all out and get it all into order so that if someone ever asks for their data you can provide it, or go through the process that some of our customers are doing. They're turning it into electronic data and then physically destroying the physical version through shredding, burning, so on and so forth. If you can sort it out and keep it secure, it's great because then you've got redundancy. You've got it electronically and you've got it physically. And another point that comes up throughout the regulation is justification. So for whatever way you're choosing to interact and process the data, it's up to you to give your reasoning for why. And so long as it's not completely crazy, the ISO are more than likely going to be fine with your reasoning for it. So as I said, we're keeping our customers' data and marketing to them because they've shown interest in our products. Therefore, they've most likely got interest going into the future with it.
That is highly justified for you keeping the data, so then you would be covered by the GDPR regulations, basically.
Next we move on to privacy policies. So there's a reason that we've got you to do the data map first, and that's because your new privacy policy is essentially going to be a copy and paste of your data map. Obviously there's going to be a few terms and conditions that you fit around it, and I know that 90% of people out there for their current privacy policies will have copied and pasted from something online. It's going to be the same now. There are now GDPR compliant ones that you can get and just fill in the gaps and fill in the big space in the middle with your data map information. Because you've written out each stage of the process, you can put that in and a customer that can read through your privacy policy knows exactly how you're going to use their data in every eventuality because you've already laid it out. It's there, plain, easy to see, and they can physically go, yeah, I agree with that, I am fine with you using my data in that way. So that would slot straight in there and you save yourself the whole hassle of having to write it all out again. But the privacy policy itself has to physically be on your web page now by law. If you can take data on it, then it has to have a privacy policy.
Again, to be fair, most businesses, I would say 95% of businesses we deal with, particularly ones we've helped previously, would have had privacy policies anyway because...
Yep, Facebook and Google at the moment, if you're going to use any of their tracking data or advertising, they already require you to have a privacy policy in place. So the majority of your sites out there, if you have one, will already have it there. It's just now that it is legally required for all sites that take any form of personal data. And I would also recommend that you have it in your store. So somewhere behind the counters just say privacy policy available upon request, have it printed out or have it so you can email it across to the customer. So in the very rare case, I don't think we've ever had anyone come in and say, I want to read all your terms and conditions, I want to read your privacy policy that's not already been online. But if you can have it there, it's just best practice that you can appease the 1 in a million customer that comes in and asks for it. So yeah, as I said, plenty of free to use templates, so find the best one for your business, go through the motions of writing out everything that's needed and then copy and paste your your written data map in to make the bulk of it. And then once you are done with it, I would, at least for this area, get it fully checked over by a legal professional.
Yeah, this is the part I think that Ben is dead right on. It's that, you know, we're not advising you to go and get a GDPR consultant in who's going to cost you probably £5,000 to look at what you're going to do, look at what you do and then probably charge you another £5,000 to implement. We're not recommending that. But however, the cost of an hour of a solicitor or a GDPR lawyer of some sort looking over your privacy policy is well probably worth the investment. Yeah.
Just to save yourself any potential fines in the future because you've missed out a few lines of text on your privacy policy. That is one investment that I would highly recommend all of you make. Next, the ICO want you to plan for failure just as much as they want you to plan and adhere to their rules. They want to plan for the eventuality that you have had a breach, you failed to adhere with some aspect of it. They just want to know that you've got something in place that all of your staff can follow to get it resolved as quickly as possible. So basically they want you to know how to recognise the data breach has occurred. So at the moment, how many of you would know if your servers, your PCs had been hacked and data had been stolen from them? Probably not a lot of you. There's plenty of programs that you can have out there to keep monitoring your routers, all inbound and outbound web access, just to help you detect anything that's going on. There's loads of documentation for how you can prepare for data breaches. We're just going to cover some very brief areas of it now. So yeah, you know that a data breach isn't just about the loss of theft or data, it could be manipulation of it. It could be them sending it through your own processes to someone else that they haven't physically stolen it, but they've given it elsewhere. Any eventuality that data has been used in some way that it was not intended for. You've got a response ready for how you're going to deal with it, and you've allocated people that are going to be responsible for reporting a breach. As I said, even if it's one of your lowest level staff that is responsible for it, you as a business owner are just as liable because your controller has basically laid all their processes in order. If they don't know the right process to go through and to report a breach, you are fully liable for that because you've not done your job, your role of making sure that they do know. So get a structure set up for any eventuality of a breach that they can go up the motions, up the chains, to make sure that it gets to the ICO. So it then goes on to say, what is a personal data breach? So it's any access by an unauthorised third party to your storage area for your data. So if you had a physical break into your business and they were into your office where you held personal data, even if they didn't do anything with it, that could still be classed as a data breach because they may have looked at it. The data may physically not be taken, but they could have a record or a copy of it. Any deliberate or accidental action. So if by some weird turn of events you've emailed your customer's data to some random third party or to someone that you hadn't laid out on all your data map, your terms and conditions, your privacy policy, that would be a data breach. If one of your customers were to lose their loyalty card, that's not really a data breach. All the cards generally have on them is a random hash code or a generic ID number on it.
And it's them who's lost it, not you.
Yeah. And thanks to the terminology of pseudonymization, that is fine. That is not actually personal data until it can be paired with the actual mechanism required to link it together. So yeah, sending data to an incorrect recipient. So if you were to be sending a load of customer invoices to one customer and accidentally went to a separate one, that would be a breach of data. So on and so forth. If your computer was lost or stolen, that once again is definitely a breach. Or loss of availability of personal data. As much as a breach can come from externally, if your secure server were to completely fail, blow up, catch on fire, and you lost a load of data, that is also a data breach. The data is no longer being stored as everyone thinks it is. And there are motions that have to be gone through, so once again it goes on to define more of what a data breach can be classed as. Once again, the ICO's definition of a data breach.
By all means read it, we're not going to bore you with it now.
Yep. It's anything that can have adverse effects on individuals that can cause them mental, physical, economical damage, material damage. So it's up to you to construe if you would class it as a data breach. Legally, there are some breaches that you would not have to report, but I would just say if you've got anything that you've had a data breach, try and track it and go through the motions of reporting it just for security in the future. So first and foremost, in the event of a data breach, you need to try and resolve the problem. You don't want it to continue happening if it's ongoing, and you don't want it to happen again. But in the event of a data breach, you also have to get in contact with the ICO or your authorising body, so to say, within 72 hours. And there's lots of documentation online to figure out who the legal body your authorisation that you have to report to is, because in all cases it will not be the ICO. Some of you will have a different person or organisation that you need to respond and contact in the event of a breach. And just as much as the ICO, if any customer's data has been stolen, contact them as well, let them know. And I'd try and once again, if you can, do it within that first 72 hours, because if you leave it any longer, so much damage could have happened to that customer that it's just best to try and avoid it. Especially if it's payment details, let them know straight away so they can contact their bank, card provider, whoever it is, cancel it, get security set up, and resolve it on their end as much as on your end. So they want to know that you've got all of these in place. So you've got a process to assess the likely risk of individuals as a result of a breach. You know the relevant supervisory authority for yourselves, You've got a process to notify the ICO or that authority within 72 hours. And even if you have got a different authority, I would recommend that you contact the ICO as well. They're the professionals, they're the ones who are regulating the GDPR, and they know all the best practices for it. They'll be able to give you help as much as they're likely to unfortunately come and give you an investigation after it happens. And so you must inform the affected individuals that the data's about with undue delay as quickly as you can. And a few other pieces, obviously you want to know what data's been stolen, you want to document it all and do your best to stop it happening in the future. And then move on to what happens if one day, like happened to Facebook recently, the ICO come knocking on your door. All I can say is try and be as straightforward, helpful and clear with them as you possibly can to try and make the process as smooth as it can possibly go. Give them full access to any servers, computers that may have access to data. You've already got your data map, privacy policy, everything ready, so as Chris said before, hand that over to them and just let them do their work. The quicker that they can get everything sorted, checked, done and be out of your hair, the better, and the better off you will be for it.
I think Ben's dead right there. I think, as with anything, if you're open and transparent with the ICO, if they were to ever investigate you, I think realistically you're going to get a much better result than you will if you're not. Also, if you've shown that you've done a load of this stuff that we're talking about now, you're going to be in a much better situation than most businesses are out there. Yep. So you therefore hopefully should negate any fines and get them right down anyway, and hopefully stop any legal ramifications that might actually exist. So.
Yep. So yeah, by keeping the records of all your processes, all your justifications on hand, ready to go, and obviously by keeping it in as many different places as you can for redundancy, as long as they are all secure, the better off you will be. I mean, if you can have a few copies of it ready so you can hand it to a few different ICO professionals or anyone who comes in to audit you or investigate you, the better. If you've got it digitally, obviously you can send it off so they can replicate it as much as they need. And by doing all of this, by being as straightforward, honest and clear with them as you can, you will heavily reduce any fines that you would get, to the point where it may only be a warning to try and not let it happen again. Most definitely it won't be the £17 million or 4% of your gross income fine, unless it is truly severe, and that's talking once again in the tens of millions of people's data being lost. So now move on to, as I said before, the customer data belongs to them. What if they come in and say, I don't want you to have my data anymore. It's my property, it belongs to me, I don't want you to have it. There are certain bases where unfortunately you would just have to comply with them, you've got no say in it. But there are others where you can honestly just say to them, no, I cannot and will not delete your data for these reasons. So if you were keeping the data for an invoice, once again for HMRC, you need to keep that data for 7 years. So you could delete all other stuff, but you would have to physically keep the data that is relevant to that invoice. So you would say to them, listen, we've deleted marketing, so other such data on your pets or anything like that. We're keeping your name, your delivery address, your mobile number, your email address. They're all referenced on this invoice and we have to uphold it and keep it as trackable data for 7 years from the point of its creation. And you also have 1 month from the date that they request to be deleted to either go through the motions and delete it, or if you're not deleting any of the data, to let them know what you're not deleting and your reasons why. Fortunately, if you go down the lane of getting consent for your data, that is completely there and then. You have to say, okay, I'm going to delete your data, unless again it's for legal bias reasons, that you have to keep it, whether it's an employee's set of data for invoices, for contracts, so on and so forth. If you've got consent for it, I'm sorry, apart from that, it's out of your hands. So if you are relying on legitimate interest for your data, as we would recommend, as I said, it's in your interest as much as it is the customers to keep that data. If they come in and say they want their data removed and you have an overriding legitimate interest, legally you can make an argument for why you want to keep that data, but best practice I'd say, well, if you've got a customer that doesn't want to be on your list, doesn't want you having their data anymore,
just don't contact them.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't want to have an email off you, don't send them an email. It's fairly simple. If someone doesn't want to be sold to by you, they're never going to buy what you're offering anyway, so you might as well remove them from the list. That's the easiest way to look at it.
With the only other theory being, if it's legally required for you to keep it, otherwise get rid of it. Keep the customer happy is in your best interest, even if they're no longer going to be your customer. So yes, I go on to give a few different examples of ways that you may want to keep the data, but it's not worth the strain and hassle of a repeated inquest basically to say, why are you keeping this data? We're doing it for this. Okay, if the customer then comes in and asks you to delete it again, you're going to go through that process again and again and again and again, because they're probably going to be adamant that they don't want you to keep their data. So just make your life easier and just comply with what they want. And yeah, so it's not just you that they can request it with. Any single person within your business is just as valid an access point for them to request the removal of data as you yourself are. So as I said, training your staff is vital for this, to know exactly what they have to do. If someone comes up to any of your staff and one thing verbally or written says to them, I want my data to be removed, you have to comply. Even if it's your lowest level staff member or even a temporary internal or someone, that has to be passed up the line to the appropriate level of staff that the data can be removed, and that customer can then be informed within that 1 month time period that the process has been completed. However, there is one, I say loophole for this one grey area, and that is in a lot of cases it's best practice to have a do not contact list. If you use MailChimp and someone unsubscribes, yes, you can no longer contact them, but they are also still on the list as a do not contact and unsubscribe user.
Yeah, so actually the little bit of the funny part of the legislation is that to really comply with what you're being asked, if someone asks for their data to be removed, you're usually removing it from your main list and putting it into a do not contact list, which then means that essentially they're asking to be removed and you are removing them from a contact list, but you are still keeping that data. We rarely recommend that, because it means if you ever were to have an investigation by the ICO, you've actually got proper proof that you have actually complied and you've deleted information.
And once again, that is not all the data, so that would be literally just keeping their vital contact data, and I'd say once again, only if you can do an automated check against it. You don't want your people to continue processing that data. You want it to be an automated thing of check this email against this list that's just came in to see if someone's already said that they don't want to be contacted by it. Otherwise, just get rid of it. Again, best practice has to be taken into account as much as the actual legislation. As I said, you've got 1 month from the point at which you receive the written or verbal request to comply. And again, that's the month, 1 calendar month starting from the day after the request. And also in the event that you refuse to comply and you give a reason why you're not deleting the data or any part of that data, you've got a month to let them know. So yeah, you need to tell them the reasons that you're not going to take action. They do have the right to make a complaint to the ICO or their supervisory authority, because in their eyes they still want their data deleted. So you may get an inquest from it if you refuse, as I said. If you've not got legal reason to keep it, get rid of it. And they have obviously got the right to seek the enforcement through a judicial remedy. And again, I've put this in because some people will probably tell you about it. You can enforce a reasonable fee with the actions of going through the process of erasing data if it requires a lot of effort on your part, or if it is a repeated thing. If someone comes into your shop on 1 week, signs up for a scheme to get a discount and then says, take me off your system, delete my records, and then does the same week after week after week after week, that is a repeatable offence, and that is the only time I would ever even consider putting a fee in, because it's most likely to stop them doing it in the future. Apart from that, I wouldn't even bother with it, because you're just going to annoy your customers even more. So looking ahead, the GDPR at the moment has already gone through alterations, as does every other set of regulations, and have not even been enforced yet. As soon as they come into enforcement, you can expect them to be changing and rewriting and get ready for all eventualities in the future, because they're then going to have real world data of how it's affecting us all.
In other words, guaranteed as of the next couple of weeks there are going to be changes coming to the GDPR.
Yeah.
Best thing we can say is keep in touch with us, keep an eye on some of the things we're saying. We're obviously going to stay on top of it from our point of view, and when we do that we'll also be sharing it with you. So if there are any big updates, any big changes, we'll be letting you know.
Yeah, with some of the main ones being Facebook. Doesn't look like they're making any changes until July. They've not really told anyone what that's going to be yet. Once we know what that is, we're going to let you know, because if you're using Facebook to manage data and Facebook goes down the line of consent for using data, you might have to then apply for consent for all of your customers to use Facebook from then on.
Yeah,
same for Google advertising. We just don't know yet. If anything like that does come about, we are going to let you know.
There'd be more company policies in regards to them than there would actually GDPR, but they will have a knock-on effect on how we interpret GDPR within our businesses.
Yeah, and how you're able to continue using them. So very quickly, we're right at the end now, just going back over some of the key points. So you're not going to get a £17 million fine for every infraction, every little nuance that you fail to adhere to with the GDPR. Basically, if you're doing your very best to adhere to it and somehow you slip up, somehow there's a breach, but you still go through all the correct motions, you're likely to knock off all, or if not most, of any fees, any fines that you may have gotten. As long as you're, of course, straightforward and as clear as can be.
You're doing it right, as long as you are being legal in what you're doing.
Yep. So consent isn't required in all cases. I would strongly suggest that you do go down the legitimate interest route, unless, as I said, you're dealing with special category data, in which case you will need consent for that data. If it's, for example, an attraction and you've got family tickets, all the adults data, that is fine, you've got legitimate interest and market to them. If you take any specific personal data on the children, you will need consent from them to use that. The data belongs to the individual, not yourself, so you have to give the individual the option of receiving their data from you or having it deleted. You do not have to comply, as I said, with the deletion of the data if they request it, but unless you're legally obliged to keep it, I would go through the motions of getting rid of it. And with most areas of the GDPR, you have a month to comply, with the exception being a data breach, in which case you have 72 hours to report the breach.
You must have a privacy policy in place, which you just missed.
Yes, that's a step ahead. So you've got to have a privacy policy on all of your sites, and as I said, I would recommend having it in store as well. You've got to provide an individual with all the data that you hold on them once they request it again within a month. You've got to include an option to unsubscribe from all of your emails, and we'll be getting in touch with them probably over the weekend soon. We're going to give you access to our GDPR portal with more info. SMSs, direct mail, they all need a way of the customer being able to stop contact with you. Although once again, it'll be a slightly different method to emails. You can't exactly click a button and unsubscribe from a piece of direct mail.
No, obviously.
You've got to be making your paper trail, so you need your data maps done, because that's going to be replicated into your privacy policies, and it's going to be what you hand over to the ICO in the case that they ever do an investigation into your business. You have to know that the ICO have the final say in all areas of this. If they come and say this is how it's done and you try and argue with it, you're just going to make things worse. They just want to see that you can justify your side of things and that you have it all laid out ready for them and you've gone through everything they want you to do, basically. There's some areas that you may not have done perfectly in, but if you've done the most that you can, you're doing fine. and finally, as I said at the start, and as I say again now, we aren't lawyers, we're not legal professionals, we've just had a lot of interaction from it with the GDPR from the start, and we're just going to keep you up to date to give you the best advice that we can, from the latest updates, from all the live talks, the press releases that we've had and been given, and from other experts' research and findings as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd like to thank Ben for putting together a presentation on GDPR. I think it's a massive help to most of us. I think most of you will probably agree that it's not as big and as scary as what we were thinking. From our mind, just work out why you hold the data. Most of you, I want you to use legitimate interest, because that is the very best and very easiest way for us to comply. Set up your data map and make sure that if you do have any data breaches and stuff, that you report them. I think if we all do those things, we're going to be so far ahead of all of our competition, let's put it that way, or all of the other businesses within the UK, that we'll be the ones who are most compliant, and if we ever do have an inspection, we're the ones that they're going to take it most easy on. So if you have any other questions, if you have anything you need to ask us, by all means get in contact with us, and we will try our very best to help you as best we can.
Yeah, and as I said, that one of the main points is security for both physical and electronic data. So on all your devices, all your machines, all your rooms, all the cabinets, anywhere that you're storing or processing that data, keep it safe, keep it secure, make sure you know exactly who has access to that area, the data itself, the programs.
And you'll be fine.
Yep.
I think that's it. Right, so thank you for your time, and we look forward to working with you again soon. Thank you.
And make sure that you check out the GDPR portal. You're probably watching this on it already, so go down below, check out the checklist for the personal data. You've also got, up top, you've got a notification bar and the navigation, so you can have a look at some of our other definitions, information sites, and of course this presentation itself. You can view it online or download it. You are free to use it how you want.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.